pleasure to introduce to you Harrison Parker. Harrison has worked for education technology companies that support K-12 schools and districts for over 10 years. He specializes in implementation and integration of web-based learning and has worked with small private schools all the way up to the largest public school districts in the U.S. Harrison heads up NetRef programs and is responsible for incorporating customer feedback into new products and features. NetRef is used in over 30 states in the U.S. to help keep students on task and ensure schools are increasing academic achievement in traditional, hybrid, and virtual learning environments. He will be joined today by Dr. Matthew Joseph, Carl Hooker, Carrie Gallagher, and Mike Evans. Harrison, over to you.
Thanks, Jen. NetRef is excited to be doing our second iteration of the breakout discussion around keeping learning progressing when schools go remote. So let me share my screen here. So last week we had some good conversations around a number of different topics, including some best practices and lessons learned from March when we had to go virtual, and we're going to dive into that more again today. I think now what we're seeing even since last week is that a lot of schools are having to adapt even further and push back their start dates and also build in more of a hybrid and virtual environment now that the pandemic is continuing a little bit further in this country. So before we get started, I wanted to introduce the new panelists that we have for this week. And I'm going to go ahead and change over here and introduce Carrie Gallagher, who is the Assistant Principal for Teaching and Learning at St. John's Prep in Massachusetts. She's also the Director of K-12 Education for ConnectSafely.org, a nonprofit focusing on internet safety. She's been a teacher and digital learning specialist for nearly 20 years and has been recognized by groups like the Family Online Safety Institute, MassQ, SmartBrief, and St. Anselm College for her outstanding work in education. Mike Evans is the CTO and Chief Information Officer at Forsyth County Schools in Georgia. And Mike has worked in several capacities for 15 years in Forsyth and currently is responsible for managing the technology services, instructional technology, and information systems teams in the district. Forsyth is one of the fastest growing counties in the state, and his goal is to provide a variety of innovative digital strategies to meet this growth. And just like the schools are going to have to do, I'm dealing with a little bit of tech challenges here. Carl Hooker. Carl is out of Texas. He is the former Director of Innovation and Digital Learning for Eanes ISD in Texas and is now an educational consultant. Carl spent 21 years in education as a teacher, virtualization coordinator, and Director of Innovation, and has recently authored a 6-part book series titled Mobile Learning Mindset. His one common belief is that students need to drive their own learning. Dr. Matthew Joseph is also with us from Massachusetts. He is the Director of Curriculum and Instruction and Assessment in Leicester Public Schools. He has served in a number of different roles now in his 25-year career in public education, from classroom teacher to elementary school principal to Director of Learning and Innovation. All of these experiences for Matt have provided incredible insights on how to best support teaching and learning and led to the creation of his book, The Power of Us, Creating Collaborative Schools. We did have Joe Phillips, you may have seen from Kansas City, signed up for today, but he is out sick, so we wish him well and a speedy recovery. Before we get started, I did want to mention that NetRef, the sponsor of this panel discussion, is the classroom management software that is focused entirely on keeping students engaged and productive while they're in the classroom or learning remotely. Another thing that we've added this year is an engagement report where we're tracking exactly how much time students are spending on the specified websites. So even if you do start off the year this fall at home, you can make sure that students are engaged. For more information about us, you can check out NetRef in the sponsor section of the ConnexionEd app or at net-ref.com. So just like what we did last week, everyone, I feel like it would be helpful if everyone that was listening in got a brief background about what back to school looks like for each of you this year. I know it's going to be completely different depending on where you are. It seems like it varies city by city, even if you're in the same county. So Terry, if you wouldn't mind, would you just start us off and just give a couple-minute introduction into what your school's plans are and what you guys are hoping to do for this fall?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today, Harrison. Great panel that you guys put together. So I work at a school called St. John's Prep in Danvers, Massachusetts. We serve grades 6 through 12. We have about 1,500 students normally on campus all at once. In the coming school year, we're going to relaunch hybrid, and that seems to be a common theme around my state, Massachusetts. So students will be attending their classes synchronously, whether they're on campus or off campus, but they'll be in cohort A or cohort B, and they will be on campus for 2 days at a time and then attending their classes via Zoom room technology, actually, on the alternating 2 days from home. And so that will help us de-densify and make sure that we're limiting how many students each child is around on a daily basis, but allow them to still have that classroom community experience with their classmates. So we're looking forward to it, and we're building up a lot of training and pulling together a lot of tools to help our teachers make sure that the teaching and learning experience is really truly high quality under these unusual circumstances. And I think we really see it as an opportunity for us to really innovate and do some incredible things with our students. So yeah, I think we still have a little anxiety, but we're also really looking forward to it.
Great. Mike, what about you in Georgia?
So we have spring, let's just say that spring was really eye-opening for us in a lot of ways. We've got about 51,000 students in the district, and we already have a 6 through 12 virtual high school that is fully asynchronous from that side of things. But one of the things that we heard from our parents in the spring was that, number one, we needed to have a virtual option for our elementary school students. And then the other thing was that the instruction that we did, really it was a matter of, hey, how can we wrap this year up and get through it with the best conditions as possible. So one of the things that we heard also was that many of the students, not many of the students, many of the teachers really kind of put their lessons out there and then just sat back, waited for the students to complete them. There was the hold harmless side of things, so there really wasn't the accountability that came with it. And our parents said that we really need to have the teachers more engaged from that side of it. So as we're opening up this school year, what we did was we actually added a K-5 virtual option in pretty much the second half of July. There was a survey that was opened up for parents to sign up if they wanted to go fully virtual. And we ended up just having to pull teachers from schools that normally might have 5 face-to-face teachers. Maybe one of them would teach virtual instruction and the other 4 would do face-to-face. So we set up some structures like that to make sure that we were able to meet those needs. The other thing that we heard was that they really wanted to have more synchronous learning opportunities for the students to make sure that there was that engagement that took place during the year or during the school week. And then also a more engaging curriculum and instruction that came along with it. One of the lessons that we learned was, number one, teachers really weren't ready to teach in that virtual environment. We're a very tech-savvy district. They're great for what they do with learning management system that we have and engaging students on that face-to-face level, but it's completely different when you're talking about a fully virtual environment. And then the other thing that we had learned was that devices, if we do end up going virtual like we had done in the spring, though we had ways to provide internet and Chromebooks for students that needed them in a low economic area, students that have 2, 3, 4 kids at home, 1 computer at home doesn't cut it. So that was the other thing that we had really had to figure out a way around that side of it, was providing more opportunities for not only internet, but devices for our kids.
Oh, that's great. And Carl, you've got a little bit of different perspective in working with, now that you're out of the district,
Right.
you know, working with a number of different school districts around the country. What are you seeing in terms of, you know, a broader view of what's going on?
Well, I mean, I reiterate some of the things that Mike was saying there. I was actually nodding a lot while Mike was saying that, because there is, when we dove into this in the spring, a lot of the learning that we saw was very low level, very just like, let's get through this, right? Kind of asynchronous. And so I like that he was saying that they're really looking at ways to do deeper learning. I would say that out of the school districts I'm working with, I saw a few things. One trend I saw right away was any school that's one-to-one before this, that had some sort of one-to-one device program in place, seemed to be a little better off. I mean, there's still struggle, but they weren't scrambling at the last minute to figure out how to get devices out, because right now there's kind of a national shortage of that. So that seemed to be, those schools had a leg up. I've worked with private schools that are actually trying to go back full time because they need the funding from their constituents. And a lot of their parents are like, we're not going to pay for virtual school. We could just go to our public school virtually that way. So I see a lot of private schools pushing towards in person, but I'm also working with a giant public school district in South Texas that's got 25,000 kids one-to-one, and they're going all virtual to start. The problem I'm running into now, what I'm seeing a lot of schools run into, is funding becomes a major issue. And here in the state of Texas, they'll fund you for the first 8 weeks with a waiver. But after that, you have to have kids in building according to them, or they won't give you any more funds. So there's some pressure. And then there's politics and all that get involved with it. But I would say that probably the two biggest issues I've heard coming up just going into the school year, besides what Mike already touched on, which is that kind of deeper learning, is that how do we build those relationships at the start of the school year when we're all virtual? And then how do we guarantee some sort of student engagement? Like, how do we make sure that our kids are online and actually actively participating versus just turning on a tab and walking away, right? So those are some of the challenges I'm hearing from my schools.
Thanks, Carl. And Dr. Joseph, I know we were talking before we started with the session, a few minutes before, that you were saying you guys already had to push back a couple of weeks in Leicester.
Yeah, and similar to what Carrie was saying, we're going hybrid as well, but ours looks a little bit different, where our hybrid model has our students who are not in person on their days home, they're full in asynchronous, where they're not having contact with teachers, where Carrie was talking about zooming in, and we batted around multiple different possible ideas, and as the way everything's going, it could shift if we had this conversation in a week. And what you had brought up is that, yes, a week ago when our school committee selected this model as the way to move forward, we had our start date after Labor Day. But in the week since that vote, and trying to plan the safe return of students and the high level of education necessary, we're seeing that it's going to take a little bit more time to get students back into school and ensuring that educational performance. And, you know, not to reiterate what everybody else said, but one of the things that is a definite part of our educational piece is that engagement. And shifting from what Mike was saying earlier, that our fall was essentially emergency learning. It was like, whoa, this has happened. We've done a few online things before, but we haven't taught this way. So it was trying to have that participation. It was filling the gaps. It was a little bit of enrichment. And one of our actual challenges now is to have our families and our teachers shift from, that's not actually online learning, distance learning, e-learning, any of the buzzwords you hear on there, and taking that participation and really measuring cognitive engagement. Because we actually gave an indicator, a rating, because we couldn't give grades. Like Mike was saying, we didn't have that measurement piece. So we were P for participation, but the wide variety of what that participation looked like. And as we start to move into that cognitive engagement versus just compliance for participation, it is something we are really diving deep into to our educational plan and looking at some of those engagement markers and measures as we write our goals and expectations for our educators and students.
Matt, along the same lines, are there different expectations and goals for asynchronous versus synchronous learning in your district?
Yes. Again, these are just terms that we're throwing around, goals, expectations. So when our students come in, they are in the in-person learning. We essentially have three terms, and if I go use up the airtime, please just cut me off. I'm okay with that. But we're using the in-person time, which is about 50% of our students coming in. Mondays and Thursdays, or Tuesdays and Fridays. Those are in-person terminology, and we call them instruction days. Our asynchronous days are application days. Those are the off 2 days. Then we're actually having a synchronous learning day on Wednesday so that we have an opportunity for all of our students in that singular class, again, following your same schedule, a typical synchronous learning day, so that you can connect with all the teachers, or connect with all the students within your class. And the expectations are going to be a little bit different, meaning the workload, for instance, high school, talking about 1 assignment per class per in-person day before the next in-person day, versus in elementary might be more of the core subjects, 4 assignments versus 6, because we have a 6-period schedule in the high school. So we're starting, so those are the discussions we're actually having in real time, was this morning, of trying to whittle that educational plan, because safety is obviously critical importance, but we are an educational system. We have to educate our students, and if we are going to have a remote plan, which is partially in person, partially asynchronous, we have to create those expectations for learners to meet their mark to both, matriculate to the next grade level.
Makes sense. Carrie, what, I know you're with your work with Connect Safely, what are some of the areas of digital etiquette and digital citizenship that should be on school and districts' radars this year?
Sure. I've seen so many like infographics and blog posts and memes posted by our colleagues in education around the country lately about what we should be expecting of our students while they're attending classes virtually and while they're on screen or potentially not on screen. And I think that there's a lot to be said there. As an educator, as Matt mentioned, of course, I want to make sure that my students are getting out of the lesson what I'm hoping that they're getting out of it. And when I'm in the classroom with them, I can see the expressions on their face. I can see their body language. And that helps me read that that's a form of formative assessment for me, right? In addition to, potentially a survey that I may give my students or an exit ticket that I may give them as they leave. That's sort of, that's the data that we don't track, right? The body language and the facial expressions. And so there's an interesting push that some of our students maybe live in a home that they may not want to show the background to their teachers, or they may not be comfortable turning on their microphone because there's a lot of noise at home. Maybe they have a bunch of siblings, or maybe it's not super quiet there. And so there's a lot of concern over how do we make sure that we're reaching our students and they're learning the way we want them to, or that way we hope they will, when we are having our synchronous classes virtually. And so I think one thing to do is to really work closely with parents and students as much as possible to set the expectations ahead of time. So if we do want students to have their cameras on at certain times, let's make sure that they can plan for that. And if they need a location that's quiet, I think it's worth kind of that one-on-one conversation with families to say, is there a way that we can help you find a quiet place? Is there, if that's not possible, how can we provide an opportunity for your son or daughter to really feel as though they're engaging with their classmates, even if their surroundings are not something they're comfortable sharing? So I think the point is that this isn't about rules so much as it is about relationships when it comes to this virtual participation. Just like it's about genuine, authentic relationships with our students when we're in the classroom with them, it's going to be on us as educators to build those same relationships even when we can't be together. So the etiquette is about just being a good human, whether you're connecting with your students virtually or in person. If we can't measure their engagement by their facial expressions or their body language, because that's just not possible for a student on one day, there are other tools that are available to us to measure our students' engagement, especially if we're fortunate enough to have a district, like Carl said, that was already one-to-one, so students have devices, or like, my children's district, who isn't one-to-one, but they did a fantastic job distributing devices. One of the tools is what NetRef has available, right? That engagement dashboard where we can see, if we couldn't see their faces or hear their voices during class, we're able to see what they were doing when we were, connecting with them virtually. So I think the key is to, number one, be a good human. Don't make it about rules, make it about relationships. Do the prep work ahead of time. And number two, use the tools that are available to you to check in on kids, and do it often, and do it in a way that shows that you care, not in a way that's meant to kind of punish them for struggling through this, as all of us are.
That's great. Thanks, Carrie. And when you were talking about virtual participation, I was thinking about, Mike, in particular, your district with so many students and teachers that you have. What types of tools are you using to keep students engaged with each other now that some of them are at home, and kind of fostering those relationships with their teacher or their peers?
That's a good point, and that was one of the items that I had mentioned earlier. That was the lacking in the spring, and that was the engagement piece. So within our district, so we have our learning management system, which we use It's Learning for our platform. And teachers, when you're talking about the face-to-face side of things from an instruction or a collaboration side, you'll do discussion boards and different comments and posts from that side of things. But when you're looking at it from a virtual side, it's completely different. So within our district, we provide and support 2 applications from the virtual side of things. So we use Microsoft Teams for our virtual instruction and virtual lessons, but we also have Google Meet is another platform. So those are the 2 platforms that we adopted to at least allow the students to engage with each other, obviously with the student or with the teacher involved too. And I think it looks from a supporting things to make sure that students are actually getting the support that they need along those lines. We need to make sure that our teachers are fully connected also. Learning in a virtual environment is 24/7. So that's one of the challenges that we're dealing with, is also making sure that we have that ability to support the network infrastructure, and also families in need at all times of the day too. So we've kind of rolled out a couple different projects from that standpoint. We use PRTG for our network monitoring and traffic alerts, so that if something does go down at 8 o'clock at night, that our team's notified and we can get someone on that right away. Because when you're talking about the engagement and that continuous learning, it doesn't stop at 4 o'clock anymore. And when we looked at our numbers from this past year, we had so much learning that took place from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning. So that just says a lot for the type of workload that's put on the network, but also from the students and how they're choosing to use their learning.
Great, and that's neat that you guys have such nice reports going on, particularly with the network, making sure that if it does go down at 7 o'clock at night, that students are still probably catching up on work from that day, more so than they were last year. So, Carl, you mentioned that you saw in the spring in particular that those that adapted most quickly were ones that, for the most part, were ones that already had a one-to-one initiative rolled out. Any other insights into why you think those were so successful?
Yeah,
or at least functioning better than most.
Yeah, and let me hit on what Mike just said there too real quickly, because it was small there, but when he mentioned the fact that the kids are learning between the hours of 10 and 2 at night, and you look at what states are mandating in terms of actually registering and engaged learners, they're still going by the traditional school day, which is crazy because kids learn outside of that gap. So while you guys were talking, I was actually looking up the state agency here in Texas to see what their requirements were for online learning, and it's 180 synchronous minutes for 3rd through 5th grade, and they define that as within the school day. So in my mind, I'm thinking, as Mike is talking, like that could be at midnight is when, hopefully not 3rd graders, but so it's interesting how we have to reframe our thinking around that. So back to your question though, Harrison, on the one-to-one. Yeah, I think the big thing was, and I think Mike and Carrie also touched on this too, I think it's that familiarity with platform, right? So now I know as a student how to log in, how to turn in my work, how to actually get things back and forth between teacher and student. And so the teacher isn't learning on the fly, the parents aren't learning on the fly, and the students aren't learning on the fly. They've all had some familiarity with programs. And what we've seen now is, in some of the schools that don't have that program in place, is that they're scrambling to find an LMS or a portal or something where everybody can go to that's super easy because parents came screaming in the spring and they're like, guys, we don't even know how to get on to these things, right? So the district I'm in, where my kids go to school, is here in Austin ISD, and they had 3 different platforms for each of my kids. Each one of my kids had to log into a different platform. And I'm a tech guy, and I was still struggling with it because there's 3 different passwords and 3 different things. And you start thinking, how do we streamline? So those schools that are one-to-one tended to have more of a streamlined process when it came to the calendar, when it came to the LMS, when it came to all the ways you can get instruction and log in and get access to that instruction. So I would say that's another advantage of that program. Doesn't mean you have to be one-to-one to do it, though, and I think schools are figuring that out right now.
Thanks, Carl. We did just have a chat come in, and the question, Carrie, I'll throw this one to you. What sort of guidance is needed to prepare parents and guide them through the school year? I know parents who have 3 and 4 kids.
Yeah. I think the big thing is for a district or a school to make it clear that what we all engaged in the spring was not homeschooling, that the parents who choose to, and even though that word was thrown around a lot, the parents who choose to homeschool their children actually prepare and submit a whole curriculum and plan for the year that's approved by their state in order for their child to be properly homeschooled. And that takes a great deal of planning. And there's a network of support that those parents utilize, and that's not what we did. What we did is transition to something in an emergency and just do the best we could to support each other. And that in the coming school year, we educators are not expecting parents to engage in homeschooling. What we are asking is for a partnership, and as a school, we will be as transparent as possible to share what your child will do and what the expectations are and how you can support them. And all we ask in response is that you are as transparent as possible with us when you're struggling, so that we can use the resources that we have available to support you. Because school is not just made up of the teachers, right? School is made up of counselors and social workers and all of these people who work very hard together to support children. And we know that supporting children is not just about their day from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. Supporting them is about fulfilling all of their needs. And that's why a lot of districts have provided food services, not just to the end of the school year. In the city where I live, food is available for free all the way through the summer, and even including weekend meals for families who need it. So I think one thing that we've learned from all of this is that schools do a lot more than educate, and that parents should be encouraged to reach out to schools for the supports that they need, because the schools are poised to really support them for that. With all of that in mind, any parent who has one of these, who has a phone, which it used to be a luxury and it's just plain old not anymore, use that to make those connections, dig into what your child is learning, and feel free and feel empowered to use the technology to connect with your child and connect with your school, because it's an incredible tool. And it's something that we're poised to have, as this is an incredible opportunity for us to really take these tools and do some real good with them at this point.
And can I jump in on that too, Harrison, real quick? I have a quick follow-up point, and that is that I was going to say, as a parent of 3, I would say that for that, whoever asked that question, that's a good question. I would say, and Dr. Joseph just put it in there too, the common terms is important. I would have a cheat sheet of just a 1-pager of all the things you need to know, like the logins, and print it out and stick it on the fridge, and then make sure your kids know where it is so they can access that stuff. Because I feel like that really helped me as like a little leg up. And then the second thing I would recommend, I saw this out of, I think it was Miami-Dade, which is a little district. It's only the 4th largest in the country. They did a parent academy, and I love that idea of just having like little tutorials. Here's how you get into Google Classroom. Here's how you get into the portal or the LMS or whatever. And that takes time. And of course, they're bigger districts, so they can do that. So smaller districts, you may just have to leverage existing content, but make a quick little website and say, hey, here's just a few things. And then parents, we need to go out there and actually grab it as well.
Yeah, and in addition, along those lines, and Carrie had nailed some fantastic ideas, and that's critical that the parents actually feel supported through this whole process. We're going face-to-face. Actually, kids come back on Thursday within our district, so we do have the virtual option, but majority, 2/3 of the district are actually going to be face-to-face. But those families that elected to go virtual, we had very clear expectations for them as well, because if they wanted to head that route, they knew that it was going to be different than in the spring, in that parents are actually going to become learning coaches. They're going to have to be there to help support and guide their students along the way. So we laid out clear expectations for what that would look like for a parent side of things. And again, this is the optional virtual, not if we ended up shutting the doors down. But another thing that is going to be really helpful for those, whether that's the optional or, unfortunately, if we do have to shut down and go fully virtual for the district, is that having the schedules in place. Several teachers they've already been communicating at the elementary school level with their virtual students, and they've built out the schedule of what that might look like. So they're encouraging parents to print it out, have it on the wall. There will be some synchronous learning, but then there's also going to be some asynchronous learning. It's that combination of things. But having that structure on the day-to-day environment is what's going to be critical to making sure that students are getting in that routine and that repetition to move forward. And that was one of the things that has been really well received by the virtual parents that have been able to get that schedule. Then they can plan accordingly. If they do need additional devices or Chromebooks, then we're providing them as well from the school. But it's going to be an interesting year, to say the least, from that side of it.
Great, thanks, Mike. Dr. Joseph, did you have a follow-up or comment on that as well?
Sure. I'm going to stay within the same theme, but take it from a different lens. So that was a fabulous question about what can parents do. I'm going to take it as someone who's in the district office. I'm going to give some advice along these same lines to our district folks, that having constant communication, having a question and answer that is updated and moving along, because as we're seeing, as people are becoming more comfortable with technology, meaning Facebook, Twitter, ways to communicate, if we as district leaders are not telling our story and being transparent, someone's going to do that for us. And the more that we are able to get in front, talk about the tools we use. That's, one of the things that when we were sharing, Carrie talked about the engagement report, where we're talking about some of the applications that we're using, talking about academies. The more that we can get out front of the communication, it will allow families to have that common language. What does remote look like? What does it sound like? You talked virtual versus remote. What is the difference in asynchronous versus synchronous? If we can have these conversations, and having our district leaders, our governor comes on almost every day at 1 o'clock. You turn the channel, you get a report, you turn it off. And I think district leaders can do the same. These are the tools that we're using. This is what engagement means. This is what different things are able to do. We did what we call the core 4 for our district. These are the 4 tools that we're using from K to 12. So families, you'll know what they are. You'll know what they look like. You know the logo. And if kids are using something different, that's not coming from us. So similar to what can parents do, I think what district leaders can do too to keep parents involved and keep parents informed is to have a constant stream of information. And somebody might say, God, you're overwhelming us with this information. If it's quiet for 2 days, go look online, because there's going to be fake information out there, things that aren't really happening because people fill that void of time. So as we look at, bringing it back to the conversation's starter, what can we do to prepare? Not only do we have to prepare our students, we have to prepare our community to know where we're going as a district, because it shifts so quickly.
That's great. We've talked a little bit about really the parent piece and on the student end, but I feel like we haven't really touched on as much the teacher side in terms of professional development for rolling out this year. How has that changed? And I'll throw this out to all 4 of you. How has that changed for you this year? Are you focusing more on a core 4 like you had, Dr. Joseph, in your district, where these are the tools that you're kind of parsing it down? Or are you trying to make sure that they've got a whole slew of different tools that they can use this year to support the different environments, be it hybrid or virtual? What is your rollout strategy, and is it different from years past?
I can speak to this if you want. I think this is a great question to transition from the parent question, because really what parents need is to know what the foundational tools are that they can depend on. What are the 1 or 2 places that they can go where they can find out what their child needs and how their child is doing? And if we really start the year strong by hitting home the consistency with which we use those 2 or 3 foundational tools, number 1, our students will know where to go. Number 2, our teachers will become proficient in using those tools, and so they'll use them better, and they'll be better teachers as a result. And number 3, we will build confidence in the parents and families that we serve, and so we'll strengthen that relationship we have with our community. So it isn't just about, you know, having the best bells and whistles. It's also using the tools the right way so that we are building trust that, you know, as educators across the country, we can do this well. We're not just doing this as a substitute for the real thing that we'll put back in place later when it goes back to normal. This is the real thing now. And we can do it well because we're going to really hit a home run with these tools that we identify that are the basis for how teaching and learning happens. So I think that's really essential. It doesn't mean you can't build on that foundation with other tools as, you know, your teachers and students and parents grow and build confidence. And you should, because there are incredible tools out there that allow for student consumption, creation, sharing, collaboration that, you know, students should have access to. But again, first we need to build authentic relationships and trust. And so, you know, having a few core tools, and I'll let the guys answer, you know, what kinds of tools those are. I think all of us could speak to the ones that we value the most, but I think that's the key. That's the agenda.
Yeah, I think what I see, Carrie, is those. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Carl.
I was gonna say those tools I see, Carrie, what you're talking about too, is that transitional, the ability of them to be flexible. So when I'm doing training right now, everything I'm teaching staff on is all about tools that you could use in either or environment. These are great tools to engage a student in the classroom. They're also great tools to engage a student online. And there is a lot. I mean, and we could go through a list, but I would say that on top of that is just making sure that whatever you're doing, I know there's a lot of free things that were thrown out at teachers at the end of the year. I'll just put on my tech director hat for just a second and just say, be careful, because we give away a lot of information too. So we got to be really careful about what tools we're adopting. And a lot of times the districts don't know. I mean, you know, unless you have some sort of reporting tool, there's no way to know, like, I don't know what teachers are using, right? So keeping track of that, and just not to say that we're going to shut down everything, but just be careful, because there are lots of new shiny things out there, and we want to make sure that they're vetted for learning, but they're vetted for that privacy side too. So I think that's important to wear kind of both hats.
Carl, that was a significant thing that we came about as well from the privacy side of things. We use a product to vet all of our district applications or applications that they want to use in the school or the classroom as well. And if it doesn't meet the FERPA, SIPA, COPA, any type of compliance, then unfortunately they can't use it. And that came up just this past week, where we had a lot from our virtual school teachers that wanted to use a whole bunch of different applications. Well, probably 60% of them did not pass our privacy specs that from the student data side. So you know, that was an eye-opening thing, and we started this about 2 years ago, but we found out, you know, quickly that some were using it and some were not. So you know, that kind of redirected our thinking from the district, reinforced that one. From a teacher's perspective, though, what we ended up doing was we delayed the students coming back 1 week for us within our district. That gave teachers an additional 5 days of pre-planning that was focusing solely on instruction, how to teach in a virtual environment. We utilized our virtual school, who had developed a training for all their new virtual teachers that come on board, to develop a kind of a quick, more condensed version of instructing in a virtual environment. So we're putting all of our teachers through that this week. And it's funny because my wife is a high school language arts teacher. And though I come to her with all these great ideas, you know, many times she doesn't want to hear it. But when it comes from her school and her ITS at her school and that they're proposing it, she's come home excited. And not only for the instructor or the virtual side, but the same things that she's learning are things that she's going to be able to use in her regular day-to-day face-to-face classroom instruction. So I think that this whole opportunity, and I call it an opportunity as a positive, is really going to transform what the face-to-face instruction is going to look like in our district, and I'm excited for what's going to transpire from that.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Dr. Joseph, I know you were going to jump in about PD and what it looked like for your district and what you guys were doing a little bit differently.
Again, I think I feel like I go after the three of you, so I don't want to repeat all that you're saying. I just want to take it from a different lens as well, but add on in the sense that we were talking about tools, and we were talking about the training piece, and we were talking about all the things that we're doing for students. The other thing that in our planning, our professional development, is looking at those tools and which ones are creating independence. So one of the things that really this time in education has highlighted is, are we having independent learners? And sometimes we're forced to have that because they're home. And sometimes it's a great thing as we move to creators of content. And I think Mike said about digital or virtual teaching. What we're trying to do in some of our professional development is get into, what does virtual learning looks like? What is that? How are you going to transfer knowledge that you get in your in-person day? So I talked about our in-person day was our instruction day. And then our application day is, how are students going to transfer their learning from the remembering and understanding to the creating and analyzing, and looking at these different tools, and how are we going to have students independently transfer learning from the in-person day to the asynchronous day when they're essentially home all day. What are those tools that are going to allow teachers to see that transition of learning? How are students taking what they know and applying it? And then one of the tools that I know NetRef has is looking at those engagement pieces. So to say, all right, these students are making progress. What were the tools that they used to apply their learning? We're looking at portfolios. We're looking at different type of tools that allow students to build, create, and analyze information. And we can see, as we set our district goals, that we're trying to ensure students are reaching the indicators that our standards have. What are the tools that are matching that growth from the initial assessment piece to mid-year all the way through, and taking those asynchronous days and seeing where we're getting the most return on investment for both the tools that maybe aren't free that we do invest in, and that what teaching strategies on the in-person day are transforming to application day growth as well. So we're trying to look at besides what the three panelists said, because that's all critically important. I echo all of that to get those tools and the right responsibilities, but I didn't want to just say the same thing. We're also looking at how we're going to transfer that knowledge when students aren't in front of us.
So with the anticipation that, hopefully sooner rather than later, that the students will be coming back into the classroom, I think that's one of the things we talked about last week that I think will be neat, is that hopefully this will be something that we can really get a ton of positives out of. While it's been a tough experience, I think a lot of the things that we're doing now virtually can be applied even when they're in the classroom. Have any of your teams started to think about bringing what you're doing virtually into the classroom after the spring experiences? Carrie, what about you? Did you guys see anything in the spring that said, why don't we just continue this regardless of if they're remote or not?
Absolutely. I think some of the changes that we made in the spring out of necessity were just plain old good teaching and learning. And so it doesn't make any sense for us not to continue those practices through the fall, where we're returning hybrid, and we are going to be able to be together for some of the time. So one example is the communication with our students and teachers by 8 a.m. every Monday morning. Every teacher is sending out a week at a glance. Here's what you can expect this week. Here's when we'll be together live. Here are the assignments. Here's when they'll due. Here are my office hours when you can reach out to me. Here are all the resources that you'll need. Now you can make a plan for your week that you can depend on, right? In a time when there's very little that we know for sure, you know for sure that this week, this is what you can depend on from me, your teacher. So I think that's been really helpful. Also just being more, holding ourselves more to the turnaround time that we give students on their feedback, on their work and their participation, and the feedback that we give. That's been really important. So if there's a certain student who really thrived when we were on campus, but he turned out to be someone who really struggled during virtual learning, we created a feedback loop with that parent and it was a team that we created with the teachers, but also the school counselors and other folks, tutors who we have who can support that student. And we used all kinds of data, right? Not just the number of homeworks that he turned in, but if there are engagement numbers that we can look at in terms of how many minutes did he participate in, like an interactive virtual activity that we were holding, how many times did he speak during classes virtually? Does he feel more comfortable to have a one-on-one conversation with the teacher instead? Digging into all the different types of information we can collect about a student and then providing those feedback loops. So we learned to do that really well and efficiently in the spring. We're going to continue to do that because that's just good for those keys, right? So I think those are a couple of easy examples. And I feel like, Matt, you need to go next because you can't go last every time. People are going to keep stealing all your answers. So Harrison, I'm going to overwrite you and say that Matt goes next.
Let me interrupt him first. No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
No, I don't mind it because I like to hear what other people say as well. And I know we're about 12 minutes left. I'm not trying to change the question, but I didn't know if there was anything you wanted to also touch on, because I think, Carrie, that was great. Like, I feel like we've been continually affirming what everybody else is saying, and I don't want to just build on it. If there was something else you also wanted to make sure that we got to, because I think that's what Carrie was saying is critically important as we look at that long lens, and also is going to what I had said earlier about the communication with families. I think having that daily look or having that weekly check-in is important. And I think also, if I were to build up and find a mechanism for students to do that, because depending on the four of us talked about 4 different plans, and that's just 4 of us. We got about 25 people on here. They could all be different. How are we having students own what they're doing and communicating it to families as well? Because if you are full remote, you're home 5 days a week. If you're remote, you could be home 2 to 3 days a week. Or if you're in person, you could be in school a week and back to full remote in the next week. So empowering students to be able to communicate what they're doing as well, and sharing what they're learning, because at the end of the day, in June, whatever September to June looks like, we as school leaders and consultants to school leaders, we have to assure that those students made a year's worth of growth. And if we have to create an avenue. So Carrie did some great examples about how teachers were communicating the expectations. Also have an avenue for students to be able to articulate that, because they may be the at-home support for siblings, or to communicate to families as well. So that would be how I would build off of that.
So we are running up against the hour here. I wanted to reach out to everyone that is on the call and see if you had any last-minute questions for the panelists that we have up here. If not, what we did last week, and I think is kind of really neat to hear, is if you could parse it down into one area that you want to make sure that you succeed in this year, this fall, to make sure that students are engaged when they are at home. It can be internet connectivity, all the way to tracking engagement. What would that one item be for your district or your school? And Mike, if you want to start on that, that would be great.
Yeah.
Just to put you on the spot really quick.
No, it's good. I would say, the one key area I think that we need to focus on, if we focus on this and we are successful, then we will have a successful online experience. And that is truly just the engagement piece. And engagement not only means students with the curriculum that they're going through, and the lessons, the activity assessments, but also engaging with the teacher. Those were the 2 big things for us that really stood up in the surveys from parents. And hopefully the training that we've gotten invested during this pre-planning time will pay off. But that's the biggest emphasis for us right now, is just that engagement piece. We feel as though we've got everything else in place. We've got our learning management platform. We've got our infrastructure. We've got an abundance of applications to help drive the but it's all going to come down to the practices. And if we're successful there, then we're going to have a good year, considering everything that's thrown at us.
Yeah, that's great. And I think someone touched on it in the chat, but having that routine and sticking to it, I think, at the beginning of the year, and making sure that you've got buy-in from all entities, be it from the parent side, teacher, and students, is really going to make this successful. Carl, what have you seen from some of your districts? What's their main, I should say, what's their emphasis? What are they putting the most stock into ensuring that it's a successful fall?
I think beside the relationship piece that I think a lot of us have mentioned over and over again, let me just say one quick thing about that. And that starts at the beginning of the year, but it doesn't end at the beginning of the year. It's a continually ongoing thing. So starting out each online lesson with some sort of hook or some way of pulling kids in, getting to know them, I think is important. But the other thing I've heard about that we haven't talked about at all is assessment. And what does that look like in a virtual remote environment? A lot of teachers are already doing what we call Googleable assessments, right? Where kids can just Google search, and now you're handing these things out remotely and then hoping they don't go search for the questions. So I think what we have to teach is like, what is better? What are there better authentic forms of assessment? And I think a lot of states are starting to see that. I know in Mike's state that the governor pretty much canceled the state assessment. In our state, they're still doing it. So how do you use portfolios? How do you use other features to really assess student learning? And I think that if that could carry over, like Carrie was saying, into the actual, in person, that's going to be powerful, because that means now we can see the whole scope and lens of what a student is learning, not just the product, but the process. And I think I'm hoping that's what those schools are really firing up towards. So the schools I'm working with right now, that's been their big thing. They keep asking me, like, what about assessment? So I've been hitting them with lots of different ideas and strategies for deeper assessment on that front.
That's great. Dr. Joseph, so that you don't go last on this one, we'll let Carrie wrap it up after.
Wow, did I make that big of a deal of that? Holy smokes, the last few times. I think there's a few. I'm going to do two mini ones because I think they're different looks. I think one of the things I would stress is to allow students and teachers to prototype what they're doing. This is new for a lot of folks, even if they've done it. Oh, I've learned over the summer how to do a few things. It's going to be new for probably 95% of our educators, and to allow them to practice and try and see things that work and really build to something impactful. It's not going to happen right away because of everything that's shifting. And that would be my second thing, is if schools and districts and teachers are making plans that can't pivot or shift, that you're making plans for this scenario, that you won't be ready when things do shift, when cultures change, when we do shift from hybrid to remote, back to hybrid to maybe full in. If your plan is not adaptable, then it's not a plan. It's really set in stone. And so I would say allow students and teachers to be able to pivot in what they're doing and learn and grow, and make plans that are flexible and that you can shift between current realities.
I can chime in, Harrison, and I would just say yes, yes, yes to everything they said. And
see, that's what happens when you go last.
I know, I'm feeling it now, Dr. Joseph. Oh man, you've had a rough time. You've really had a rough time. So I would say prioritize pathways of collaboration. The teachers who had the most success and the families that had the most success in the spring are those that leveraged the relationships that they had to work together. Anybody who tried to do it all by themselves really struggled. So teachers who co-planned lessons or projects really created higher quality lessons or projects for their students in the spring. Parents who were able to kind of partner with other families, even if they couldn't actually be physically in the same place, but they had like virtual meetups for their kids, right? Or they arranged for virtual play dates. Those are the families that thrived the most. Or they went on bike rides where you could be socially distant and still be together, right? Those families that worked together, they had the sort of the best of a tough situation. So I think prioritizing tools that allow for collaboration is really key. And there's a bunch of tools were thrown into the chat earlier, but it works both professionally for the teachers. It works well for the families as well.
Thanks, Carrie. And thanks to everyone on the panel today. I know everyone's busy getting ready for this school year, and Mike, you're starting on Thursday, so really appreciate everyone's time as we get ready. And for those that joined in, I think it's, these are all really good conversations. We need to continue to talk about what we learned from the spring, what we're planning on doing this fall, and then making sure that we hit those targets. And then more importantly, in the future, really tying this back and figuring out what we can take from this time, anything that worked well at home, and then bringing it back into the classroom, because it would seem like a kind of a wasted effort if we didn't really learn from this experience. Before I pass it over to you, Jen, I just wanted to again mention our program, net-ref.com. So NetRef allows your teachers to keep students on task as fall as they are remote. That's one of the big components, is making sure that students are actually learning while they're at home. So NetRef will allow your teachers to be able to focus attention on particular websites. You could lock them into a quiz or 10 websites so that they're not playing Netflix or getting easily off task. And then the second component, I know a lot of parents are going to be curious as to all of the investments that have gone into purchasing hardware devices and learning at home, if it's really paying off. I'm really proud of our team and the reports that they've just built that will identify students that are struggling at home, so that district leaders can jump in and make sure that someone doesn't need a hotspot, and that or that they're just really struggling to stay focused, and that we can jump in and help them so that there's not a continuation of any sort of equity divide there. So thanks again for everyone, and Jen, let me pass it back over to you to wrap up.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Harrison, and to all of the panelists for sharing your insight and experiences. I know I definitely learned a lot of what's going on with the education realm right now. Also, thank you to the attendees for joining us for this session. This recording will be put onto the schedule within 24 hours, so make sure you're checking back there if you would like to watch it again or share it with somebody else that you may know. Some reminders for ConnexionEd: make sure you do fill out the survey in the chat to get your points for the event game. Also, since NetRef is one of our platinum sponsors for this event, if you set up a one-on-one meeting with them and reach out to them through the sponsors tab in the app, you will get more points as well. So make sure you're reaching out and learning more about their solutions. We do have 3 more sessions today that you can watch live, so look at the schedule to see what we have coming next. Again, thank you, Harrison, and to all of the wonderful panelists, and thank you, attendees.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you.